So the new season's been out since Wednesday. We're in the preseason right now. And I've been able to test a lot of runes, and I've been able to compile my thoughts into opinions on them. And I decided to share them in a video because I was asked by a lot of people on stream to just make a video about it since I was talking a lot about it. And I feel like I have some valuable information to pass on to you in terms of what is really good, what is a noob trap, what is going to end up making you the most successful in the preseason, and my thoughts behind the balancing of these new runes. But this particular video is going to be entirely on keystones. And the keystones are the big boys. These are, you can only take one of them per game, and these are the most powerful out of all the new runes. And the keystones are probably the most important to know which ones to take for which champion because of how powerful they are, or how powerful they could be, and how weak they are in some situations. And we're going to start in the precision tree, and they are, I mean, there's a lot of different trees, but I'm going to assume that you at least have the basic understanding and have at least played one game or a couple games on this patch, so we're not going to go to the really basic portion. So for press the attack, I'm assuming you may have seen somebody use press the attack. You've heard things about press the attack. What I think about press the attack is this is the new fervor. This is incredibly good on a lot of attacking top laners, something like a Kled, bot lane, 80 carries are taking press the attack right now over the alternative of lethal tempo. And the reason why press the attack ends up being incredibly good on like on hit type champions is because it's easy to proc for champions that have on hit, like Renekton top lane, Kled. They have really easy enablers, Renekton being one of the easiest in the game, and auto attack just from into a W that's not even empowered will proc this. And it does damage, adaptive damage, and then it makes that target vulnerable to all sources for by 12% for 6 seconds. And in my experience, this just marks somebody for death. In a team fight, and duels, and a gank, press the attack is better than lethal tempo because of the second portion of this in addition to the first portion. So it does damage after the third hit, and then it marks the target so they take 12% extra damage. This is like a mini Deathfire Grasp from the old school days, except this works on all sources. So if you're receiving a jungle gank and you have press the attack, it makes the gank way more successful in team fights. If somebody procs press the attack on somebody, that person's probably going to die faster than everybody else. Press the attack is great for lane. It's great in team fights. It's great in ganks. This is just perhaps one of the most consistent summoners. Did I say summoners? Press the attack is perhaps the most efficient for attack speed champions or attack dependent champions because it works in a variety of situations. And lethal tempo is a lot more different than press the attack because it is a little bit more conditional. You only have it for a certain time frame. Press the attack has the amplified damage for 6 seconds, but for lethal tempo, one of the problems is that you could either be crowd controlled before or during lethal tempo, and also during lethal tempo when you're at this max attack speed, it is quite difficult for most players to move and maximize attacks per movements, especially since this lifts the attack speed cap for a lot of champions. Now, in a vacuum, this is better than press the attack because of how much damage output you could theoretically get if you could play perfectly. However, we are all not perfect players. Lethal tempo ends up falling short compared to press the attack because on 80 carries, when you can amplify your support's damage in conjunction to your jungle and your entire team, press the attack is going to provide more for the team. Lethal tempo would only be better than press the attack if you were playing a fed on-hit champion like Kog'Maw or something, and you were the strongest on your team by a huge margin. In almost every other situation, press the attack is just more consistent. It provides more for the team and allows you to inevitably have more impact on the game. So I'm not a fan of lethal tempo. I think lethal tempo is a noob trap. It's really easy to look at it and be like, man, look how much extra damage I could be theoretically getting. But attack speed's always been a really weird stat because unless you are scripting, you can't perfectly manipulate attack speed and movements. You just can't. So you're inevitably going to lose some portion of the usefulness, whether it's the attack speed, like not getting every single attack per second that you could because you're moving, or you're not moving enough between the attack speed, or if in some situations, if you stand still, you're going to die. So I don't think lethal tempo is that great. Have fun in the preseason or whatnot, but it's my firm opinion that lethal tempo is outshined by press the attack. And fleet of foot is just not worth taking almost in any circumstance, no matter what. It's a weaker Warlord's Bloodlust, and the alternatives in every tree, including this tree in particular, the Precision Tree, outshine this by a massive margin. I have never seen somebody with Fleet of Foot successfully outperform another Keystone. This is largely considered a joke Keystone right now by just about anyone that plays at a high level. And maybe in very specific situations, Fleet of Foot might have some very small usefulness, or you're just trying to have fun and you want to play a new Keystone. Here you go. But if you are for some reason like super tryharding and you only want to take the best stuff right now, Fleet of Foot is just suboptimal, and it's just not good. It's a weaker Warlords. That's it. Now we're going to move on to the Domination tree. Electrocute is the new Thunderlords, except the cooldown is longer early game, but the damage is higher. And one of the recurring trends you're going to find on the preseason is due to the old runes being removed and a lot of champions not receiving full compensation for their base stats, you see a lot of champions not having magic resist early game or not having armor. You're not going to have both. Some champions got armor to compensate for the removal of runes because they're melee or they were a jungler, but mages only got health per level. They did not get armor or magic resist, and I don't think anybody got magic resist. So basically right now, this does magic damage, potentially, or physical damage. It depends, because it's adaptive damage. So this can be really, really, really strong on some champions that already have a high burst damage output, like Talon or Zed, or some mages like Syndra, who already do an extremely high amount of damage on this patch because no one has early magic resist. And Electrocute just kind of pushes certain champions over the top to the point where they're just one-shotting. And that's why Electrocute can be useful, is if you're playing a champion that is a combo champion. The best examples being Talon and Zed, because they can abuse this as early as level 2 and 3 very, very proficiently. And this just pushes their burst load over the edge, so they're a huge lane bully now. They were before, but now they're just insane. This isn't going to be as good on top laners. This is more mid laners and some junglers that are just looking to early snowball. Electrocute is just that extra push for your trades early to help get the kills. But because of the cooldown, this isn't as good on like poke champions or champions that need to combo multiple times to kill somebody. This is more burst oriented. And it's very good right now on those champions that are burst oriented because everybody's so squishy. Predator is pretty overrated. When I first tried this, I tried it on a lot of junglers. I've seen people try it on top laners. I've seen them try it on mid Twisted Fate. Very overrated. I completely jumped the gun on this. I thought it was going to be really good in the jungle. And what ends up making this so awkward is a couple of things. One, you have to have boots to use this. You can't use this unless you have boots, and you can't use it for the first couple minutes in the game. So that's the first part that makes this awkward. The next part is it's just not as good as the other Keystones. And that's a huge drawback, because if you have Predator, when it's up, yeah, it feels great. You run in, you get a kill, that's amazing. But then you're going to immediately lose trades in lane, or before this, you're going to lose trades in lane if they land Electrocute. And if you take this in the jungle, you're going to lose duels against the enemy jungler if they run Electrocute or press the attack. So when you take Predator, you're basically saying, I can't duel the other jungler or laner, and I'm only going to be useful when this is randomly going to be up in different situations that I need it in. But when it's up, it's going to be very good for roaming. So if you can somehow win lane or be proficient enough in the jungle to be good without this, then this is still decent. Now, the champions that have had decent success with this in the jungle have been Kha'Zix and Rengar, mostly because of their stealth mechanic. Kha'Zix, if you take your R evolution early game, you can basically you can use your Predator and run through the bushes from like one side of the jungle to the other side while being stealthed, or nearly the whole time being stealthed. And that can be kind of useful if you are just trying to get through and bypass vision to get to one squishy. It's also useful in team fights because they both have stealths. Kha'Zix can just use this, run out of a bush, stealth again with the ultimate, get to a squishy, proc Duskblade, Q, auto, W, R, auto. You know how it goes. You're just trying to get as many Duskblade procs off as possible, and Predator on a lot of stealth champions can extend how far they could go. If it's like Shaco jungle or Kha'Zix, you can only go so far. I tried this on Wukong. It did okay, but you're still Wukong. And Rengar was probably the most successful for me because you could pre-level 6 gank laners that aren't near bushes with this, and also when your ultimate was up, I had no problem pretty much running down anybody that I ever wanted to. The ultimate for Rengar does give him movement speed, but this takes it over the top to unpredictable levels of movement speed where they see your ult and then you're suddenly really, really far away killing somebody else. And yeah, so it's basically the best on stealth champions, but even then, you may be better off just taking Electrocute on Rengar and Kha'Zix in early snowballing. Or if you really want like the in-game scenario, the dream, the one-shotting dream, then you could go Dark Harvest. But Dark Harvest ends up being very bad for most of the game. It is potentially the highest damaging keystone you could ever get in League right now, but it takes an incredibly long time, almost the end of the mid game, the start of the late game, before Dark Harvest becomes actually good. And it's very dependent on snowballing. It's very dependent on farming. It's just really awkward because the games are so fast right now. I would say that Dark Harvest has potential if the games ended up being longer. The games are not longer in my experience. Only a handful of games have gone to the late game, and they've mostly just been because somebody on one team is holding that team back from winning immediately. For instance, I had one of my late games that I had would have been like a 20-minute win probably, but we had a 0-16 Leona support on our team. And Leona's very good on this patch, but this player certainly challenged that fact. And, that game would have just been pretty much instantly won by my team if that player had played better or not played Leona or had known how to play Leona, because she's very good on this patch. So Dark Harvest needs that late game. If you do make it to late game, Dark Harvest is great, but chances are in the preseason, the games are going to be very, very, very short for you, whether it's a win or a loss. Matches are incredibly one-sided due to the snowballing factors. Everybody's so squishy. Towers are getting taken down incredibly fast right now. Super squishy. Demolisher is helping a lot of champions take down turrets faster. You got York top lane bulldozing. So TLDR, Dark Harvest has potential, but only good like mid to late game. Early game, it's very bad. We're going to move on to Sorcery. Aery is one of the more useful keystones because it can work on just about anybody. You don't have to have a shielding and damaging ability for Aery to be strong. I've seen Akali's take Aery. I've seen a lot of champions take Aery that are just like even all-in based, but still have the poke potential. You could just be Akali and throw your Q in lane and summon Aery to get a little bit of harass in. But I see this be the most proficient on champions that this can either bounce between very quickly, aka like an all-in dashing champion like Akali, or a champion like Karma, who can abuse both portions of this, or Lulu. Both good examples of good Aery users because they can use both the damage portion, the poke, harass, and the shielding portion. But one thing to note about Aery is you can't reuse it until Aery returns to you. So if the targets you're using this on are really far away from you, you're not getting the same output as you would if you were closer to them. And so if they're right up on top of you and you're playing Lulu, this will end up being pretty devastating. But the situations vary, but this is consistent. Aery is going to hit. It's going to shield. The differences between that and Arcane Comet is Arcane Comet can be dodged. It only goes at the location when you hit them with the ability. So unless they're crowd controlled, slowed, whatever, this is not guaranteed to hit. They can dash it. They can move out of it if they have enough movement speed. And it can end up being worse than Aery for a lot of mid laners because it's just not guaranteed to hit. If you're playing a mid laner, a good example being Twisted Fate. If you gold card your lane opponent, the Comet will hit, even if it's just a rank 1 W, unless they have tenacity. a lot of tenacity. So Arcane Comet being best on pretty much Twisted Fate. A really good choice for him because of his lane trading power. I've seen some Twisted Fates take Predator, but you're going to lose lane really hard if you do that on Twisted Fate. Arcane Comet gives you some good trading power. But I would only take Arcane Comet over Aery if your champion had a way to set up the guarantee this hits. Or you could consistently proc this because of your low cooldowns. This is one of the keystones that I would say I need to see more people take and try it out more on myself. I have used it. I've used Aery as well. But the situations that both are useful in are very similar. They're both going to be taken by a lot of poke champions. A lot of mages are going to be taking this primarily. But Aery is going to differ because you're going to see it more on a variety of picks. Whereas Comet, I think, is more of a very specific scenario. And both are very good on champions like, say, Zyra support. You could theoretically take both. And even though Comet does more damage than Aery, it's riskier because it's not guaranteed to hit. Phase Rush, this is just a weaker Storm Raider Surge, and you don't get the slow resist for range. So this is actually a worse Storm Raider Surge. The cooldown's longer, the early movement speed is lower, and only melee gets this slow resist. So, but it's easier to proc. You only need to hit them with 3 attacks or separate abilities. So even Nunu could technically use this, but Nunu is so bad on this patch, and as I've played Phase Rush Nunu, but it just doesn't end up working as well as you would hope because the other keystones are tremendously stronger in most cases. So, I mean, like, the Nunu game was just kind of like, I was truly testing the limits of Phase Rush. But this could still be potentially good in situations where, say, you're against a Nasus, you're playing a melee top, and you aren't taking Press the Attack, or we'll talk about Grasp of Undying later. But Phase Rush could be good against Nasus, very good against Nasus. But this is more specific. You're not going to take this unless certain circumstances present themselves to you as being necessary. Now we're going to go into the Resolve tree. Grasp of Undying is a good trading tool top lane on champions like Shen and York. Pretty good examples where you aren't going to be trading constantly, but when you are trading, Grasp is going to be pretty useful for you. You get 5 extra health every time you proc Grasp now, meaning if it turns into a wet noodle fight top lane, the person with Grasp or both of them will pretty much get a lot out of this, and maybe both teams lose because of that. But yeah, tanks get tankier with Grasp of Undying because of this. However, I honestly don't think this is as strong as most people make it out to be. They see the permanent 5 extra health, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have 9,000 health when I play Shen because the games are so long and I'm always hitting the enemy laner. It's not as much health as you would think, but it can certainly be a surprising amount of health if the game goes late, which the games aren't going late right now. So it's not the easiest to test out how much health you can get in a realistic scenario because the games are so one-sided. And in those super late game fantasy situations, there's a reason why I went to late game in this early game meta. But the reason why Grasp isn't taken constantly by other top laners is because of Press the Attack being really good on champions like Renekton, Fiora, a lot of champions that previously take Fervor. But if you're not taking Grasp or Press the Attack, you're probably taking AfterShock. AfterShock is actually incredible right now. This might be one of the strongest keystones in the game besides Kleptomancy, because this is not only a tanky keystone, but it does more damage than Electrocute at level 1, especially if you have a decent health pool. It's doing way more than Electrocute on a lower cooldown. The downside is to get the damage portion of this, you have to stay close enough to them that when the shielding portion or the armor and magic resist portion expires, the shield explodes, dealing the damage. So you have to stay next to them. The good part of this is that if you take this, your champion probably has crowd control because that's the only way to proc AfterShock. But it gives you flat 20 armor and magic resist. So as early as level 1, this allows you to outtrade just about everyone. In the jungle, this allows you to win duels. This pretty much beats everything. And then on top of the 20 flat armor and magic resist, you get 30% additional. And that's not bonus, that's total. So this ends up being one of my favorite keystones because of how ludicrously strong it is. It helps you win duels, not only because of the tankiness, but it does more damage than Electrocute. On a lower cooldown, Electrocute's a 50-second cooldown at level 1. This is 20 seconds all game. and it does 40 to 140 damage, but on top of that, it does 3.5% of your maximum health. So if you have 600 health at level 1, which the Resolve tree gives you 130 extra health, this will do 61 damage at level 1 if you have 600 health, and this procs on somebody. It's a lot. It's a lot of damage. Incredibly good. Really good on junglers. Really good on tank supports. Like Leona is probably one of the best in the game using AfterShock. And some top laners like Nautilus or whatever tanks they're going to be taking, like Maokai. If you're not taking Grasp, AfterShock is insane. This is one of the best team fighting keystones. This is the best team fighting keystone. It's actually broken, but until they nerf it, you should be using it on a lot of crowd controlling champions. Guardian could be better, but they're a lot. The cooldown's really long, and you're not taking AfterShock. So the downsides of this, and this is pretty much only taken by supports. Like this is really just supports right now, and so I would say a lot. This is kind of a noob trap right now. Taking Guardian, it looks really good on paper. Don't get me wrong. I look at this shield, look at this movement speed, and I'm thinking, dang, this is really strong. But the cooldown is way too long, 45 seconds compared to AfterShock's 20-second cooldown. If you're playing, I don't know, like if you're playing a champion that can only use Guardian and can't use AfterShock or something like that, chances are you should have been playing something that uses Aery bot lane, or you should have just been playing something that uses AfterShock, because inevitably Guardian just gets outshined by AfterShock supports and Aery supports or Kleptomancy supports, and it's just not better than those alternatives. The cooldown's too long in this. If they lowered the cooldown, it would be definitely more viable for supports to take it, and really no other champion in the game is going to take this, because if you're a mid laner and you take this or something, you're going to lose lane really hard. This is truly a support keystone, and it's just not better than the alternatives. And finally, we have the inspiration tree. Unsealed spellbook, I have a lot of hope for this, but right now I don't think it's very good at all. The best part of this is perhaps just simply the fact that your summoner spell cooldowns are reduced by 25%. If you switch out your keystone, if you switch out your summoner spell, it will be on the same cooldown as the summoner spell that you had just switched out. So you can't take Ignite, use it, and then immediately base and try to switch it out. It's going to be on the Ignite cooldown, whatever you switched out with. So it has potential, but it just gets outshined by the other summoner spells right now. I mean, just having your summoner spells on a 25% less timer can be pretty good. It could be very good on some champions that are dependent on flash, but I would say that I've seen it in a limited number of times, and in those limited number of times, it did not work out well at all. And this is one of the keystones. This is actually the only keystone that I haven't tried yet. And that's just been because of how lackluster I view it. I had theory crafted a lot of stuff that you could potentially do as like a top laner, taking smite and switching to teleport and stuff. But in all actuality, it just doesn't work out well. It's really clunky. If they buffed it any and the meta shifts, or if like the game shifts a little bit, so Krugs or Gromp spawns sooner, then I could see there being some situations where top laners could take smite, do a camp. You know, there could be some really dumb stuff that unfolds. Now, some of the stuff that I've seen people try are like, you know, taking smite top lane so that they can build Cinder Hulk, or the warding jungle item. There are a lot of things that you could try, and this is certainly great for creativity, but in a fully optimized environment, I don't see this happening until either something really broken is discovered, which by all means go out and test this. But so far, my opinion is this is just lackluster until things change. Glacial Augment had a lot of potential for this, where I had ideas that this had a lot of potential. I thought this would be great on like Gnar and Shyvana and maybe Teemo and stuff like that. Champions that would abuse Frozen Mallet in some situations, this could be great on. But what ends up making this not very good is that you don't have the other keystone. If you take Glacial Augment, you can't take Press the Attack on Shyvana. If you take Glacial Augment on who else? I mean, I guess Gnar is in a weird spot, but Glacial Augment just gets outshined by the other keystones. It has potential, but until some things are moved around, other keystones are nerfed, or this is like changed a little bit. Yeah, it's great that you have this, but the weird thing about like thinking that Gnar needs Frozen Mallet early game is assuming he also has enough movement speed to keep up with him on like a consistent enough basis that they're not immediately going to just out trade him, and or it doesn't matter to have the slow early game because they will beat you in trades. It's like if you got Glacial Augment in a fantasy scenario in the mid game hits, you don't have to build Frozen Mallet. That seems great. But in all actuality, it's not that great to have a slow early game on champions that are just losing trades. So if you took this as a top laner, chances are you're probably going to lose a lot of trades because they either took Electrocute, Aery, or press the attack, and they're just going to murder you. It's not like they're going to be running away from you constantly. However, I see this being better in low elo. I see this potentially up until like plat or diamond actually being pretty good, because a lot of people will just be like, oh no, I got to run. And then that's great for you if they're not fighting you and they're running. But in most situations, people are just going to like, if they understand what you're doing to them and what they can do to you, if you have this keystone over another keystone that does damage, like grasp or press the attack or something, you're going to lose trades. And that means that you're going to lose lane pretty consistently. Kleptomancy is the most broken keystone if you can consistently use it. So abusers of this being Ezreal, #1 choice, Gangplank #2, and supports like Sona could potentially abuse this, but Aery is also incredibly good on Sona. So what makes this so broken is if you can consistently use a spell and auto-attack the enemy champion, you get bonus gold, and there's a chance you'll get even more bonus gold or a consumable, including elixirs, health potions, wards, lots of great stuff. So this could... You could be absolutely fed out of your mind just because you get lucky early Kleptomancy procs before your first base. I've seen a Swain top lane against a Shin on his first base within like 3 minutes or something like that. He had like 900 gold. He got so lucky with the Kleptomancy procs, and it was Swain versus a melee. So if you're ranged versus a melee, this is the most abusive situation. And Swain is a really good example because he can just slow them, walk up auto, use E, auto, W, auto. It has a slight internal cooldown, so you can't just rapid fire do it, but it's on a short enough timer that if you're trading pretty consistently and abusing a melee top as a ranged or a ranged support against a melee support, this ends up being the most profitable and valuable keystone in the entire game. Only seconded to AfterShock, which I think is really busted. But if you're playing Ezreal, even Ezreal support works with Kleptomancy. Like we're in a meta where literally Ezreal support is broken right now because of how broken Kleptomancy is on Ezreal. 1 Q, just procs it. Gangplank Q, just procs it because it counts as an on-hit. So that was all the keystones. I will cover all the runes, but I do need to do more research on the runes. I was able to do and look into the keystones a lot easier because they're bigger and they're splashier and they're easier to test, whereas there are more variations with the runes and there's different combinations you can do to increase the value of the runes. But the keystones are pretty set in stone in my mind. I've seen some things with the runes that have been very polarizing, which I'll include in the next video. But until things change, this is kind of how I think the runes are right now. There's some really, really good ones. There's some really bad ones. There are mediocre ones and very situational ones for sure. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in my next rune video, and I hope you enjoy the preseason. Have a good day.